And here we go for week 12 of the NFL action. My name is Drew Garino, welcoming you live into this week's version of the Pick'ems. We're giving you some exclusive behind-the-scenes video footage of what's going on here and how these predictions are working here. So I'm happy to be here with you. Quick recap on how things went last week for me. 4-1 on the week, bringing my total up on the season to 35-25, which is dynamite. Looking ahead at this week's matchup, we first need to see that Cam is still on top. That's what she said. Still on top in the league right now with an impressive 8-3 mark, but look out behind him because he's got Sean Doolan right on his heels with 6 consecutive victories. We also have Bud, who's very much alive in the playoff picture. We have Bill, Dennis, Ryan. They're all in the mix here. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot going on here, so we will see how this week's action will unfold. We're first going to look at Sean versus Cam in this pivotal matchup of 1 versus 3. Sean, again, hopes to make it 7 consecutive victories as he squares off with number 1 Cam in this week's action. Sean's quarterback carousel is going to land this week on Josh McCown, who looked very strong last week against Washington, and this week he has a very desirable matchup against Chicago. So I like for him to make it 2 straight weeks. You want to talk about 2 straight weeks? Look no further than Mike Evans, who has been an absolute beast, putting up monster numbers over 200 last week. So Sean will hope that McCown finds Evans to give him a good shot at a victory this week. Really, the 2 keys for Sean when you look at the matchup, you got to look at his RB2 position. He's got to look at his flex positions. He's going to really need a strong performance from both Joique Bell and Terrence West in order to have a strong shot at winning this week. I like Joique's ability to catch passes out of the backfield against the Patriots. And West should be the lead back now if you notice that Ben Tate was cut by Cleveland, so now he is no longer in the picture. So West could be in line for a big game as well. Speaking of Cam's roster, Kenny Stills was a nice little pickup for him. Sean lost Brandon Cooks for the season, so Stills should be the primary benefactor of that. He'll plug and play in that spot, and I like that opportunity for him. Speaking of wide receivers and being patient, Josh Gordon makes his return to the lineup, and he should be a big-time contributor down the stretch. That's a great addition for Cam. That's someone that really he could be relying on for weeks to come as he makes his push in the playoffs. So I like for his ability to catch some passes immediately with Hoyer in the quarterback picture. I do have some concerns. Obviously, it's really the same concerns that I've had about Cam's roster. When you look at Kelsey and Bennett at the 2 tight end monster positions, they've really struggled the last 2 weeks, so I'm watching them closely to see if they can come through. When all's said and done here, I'm looking at Sean to win this one because I think his roster from top to bottom is very balanced, and I have some concerns again about those 2 positions on Cam's side of things, so I will take Sean to win this week. Next matchup we're going to be looking at here is Bud versus Steve. Bud hopes to make it 2 consecutive victories, helping his playoff status, while Steve honestly just wants to win a game. Bud is dealing with 2 big blows on his offense right now. He's got Dwayne Allen, who left last week's action with an ankle injury, and also Emmanuel Sanders, who got absolutely walloped by someone on the Saints, the Rams, I have no idea who it was. 50-50 that Sanders plays from last I saw. He didn't practice today, but he was watching practice, so that somehow could be a good sign for him to practice tomorrow, then ultimately play on Sunday. Not as optimistic about Dwayne Allen, so there needs to be an adjustment on Bud's roster for that. Romo's in the lineup for the Cowboys, which really benefits Jason Witten. He's been back on track the last couple weeks, so I like for him to get another strong performance against the Giants on the road. If Sanders is not able to go, Bud does have John Brown in the lineup, that 3rd-round pick out of Pittsburgh State. 11 targets in the last 2 weeks each, so that obviously bodes well for him in terms of a plug-and-play opportunity. If you look at Steve's roster, it seems like he's found himself a nice little running back in Trey Mason. He's had back-to-back strong weeks, although he's got a little bit more of a difficult matchup than he's had in the past few weeks. It's San Diego, so it's still possible he could have a good game with that. No one on the Texans was more thrilled that Ryan Mallett was inserted in the quarterback position than Andre Johnson. He has done very well with Mallett under center, so that could be a good sign of things to come. Andre Johnson could be a key contributor down the stretch here in terms of his fantasy production. I think at this point it's safe to say that for Steve, Ertz was just a bust. It just didn't work out with Zach Ertz and the Philly tight end. It's something that we just have to say at this point. It just didn't work out. When you look at this matchup, it really is ultimately coming down to whether or not Emmanuel Sanders is going to be active for this game. I believe that he will go, which leads me also to believe that Bud will win this week against Steve. Next matchup we're going to look at here is Dave versus Adam. This is really the battle to not wear the pink shirt as they square off to see who will have a better seed in the consolation bracket. Dave versus Adam. We'll start with Dave. 2 huge games from Brandon Marshall. Nice to see him back. He's partying like it's 2010. He's at home against Tampa Bay, so it's another opportunity for him to score some big points. Dave also will welcome back Gio Bernard, who has missed the last 2 weeks of action due to injury. He slides right into that matchup against Houston. That's a very promising matchup for him. It's a great way for him to get back into the high point scoring total ways. Tough break last week for Dave with Julius Thomas leaving with an injury. All signs are pointing that he will be active, but it's definitely worth monitoring in his roster to see how effective he really will be. If you look at Adams' team, he's been getting some pretty strong running back performances. He's really gotten the best out of Jamal Charles the last 2 weeks. He's got the game tonight against Oakland, so it's another opportunity for him to have a big game. Although Adam is starting Dwayne Bowe over Bishop Sankey, I'm not sure I agree with the move. Dwayne Bowe, again, we've been through this. He's not one of my favorite guys in fantasy football. And I like the way Sankey's been running the ball recently, so I'm not sure that that's the correct move for Adam in that regard. It's really going to be interesting to see if Golden Tate gets a lot of Revis on Sunday. That seems to be like that's going to be the scenario there, so that bears monitoring. Obviously, if Golden gets Revis, he could be stranded on the island with very limited water. So when you look at the matchup here, I ultimately like Dave's ability to score across the board here. I think Bernard's going to have a nice little insertion back into the lineup. I like the way Odell Beckham has been catching passes as well, so I'm going to take Dave to take this one and beat Adam. Now we're going to look at myself versus Ryan. Drew had a big loss last week to Bud that ultimately ended his fantasy playoff opportunities, while Ryan is currently sitting in that last spot in the playoff seeding, which really is going to help him out if he can win this week. It's really important that he gets these wins. If you look at Drew's roster, it's really ultimately it's a completely different team. You're looking at guys like Colin Kaepernick, Fleener, C.J. Anderson, A.J. Green. These are all new guys for him, so it's a completely different roster from what he's had the first 11 weeks of the season. Speaking of C.J. Anderson, that should be a nice plug-and-play for him because Ball and Hillman are both out with injuries, so you got to expect that Anderson's going to get the bulk of the work. Really need to see more from McCoy, though, since he's been acquired from Adam. He hasn't really done a ton for Drew, so that's a guy that needs to step it up in order for Drew to put up his projected point totals. For Ryan, he is the ultimate victor of Andre Ellington. Suck it, Dennis. Ryan was able to get Ellington as his second running back. He continues to catch passes out of the backfield, which is going to be important because he has 2 matchups against Seattle in the coming weeks, including this week. So that's really going to test Ellington's ability to be a productive fantasy player, is whether or not he can catch those passes consistently. Rashard Jennings returned for Ryan last week. He had a nice little return, over 10 points. He appears to be healthy, which is great. He could be a key contributor for Ryan down the stretch as the flex position. Another key guy for Ryan, because Olsen is on a bye, he's starting Niles Paul, which appears to be a good move because Jordan Reed should be out of lineup with another injury, his 5th or 6th of the season. So Niles Paul should be a nice little plug-and-play start. It's just a matter of whether or not his quarterback can get him the ball. That's going to be the key. When you look at the matchup totaling both sides of everything, it's going to be a tight one. The projected score is pretty tight. But ultimately, I think the new additions on Drew's side are really going to be enough to give him a win. I liked what A.J. Green did last week, and I think Colin Kaepernick is in line for a pretty good big game against Washington this week as well. So I'm going to go with myself to take that one. Last matchup we're going to look at, matchup of the week, is Dennis versus Bill. It's really a must-win situation for both gentlemen here as they currently sit outside of the playoff standings. So it's important that they win this matchup and rebound from last week's losses that they each respectively had. Dennis to Sean, Bill to Dave. Dennis will welcome back Des Bryant in the lineup. After putting him on the trade deadline, or trade block, we'll see how he responds to your coaching move, Dennis. But he does have the opportunity for a very strong game against the Giants secondary. Lamar Miller looked fantastic on Dennis's bench last week. For him to put up a high point total, Lamar Miller is going to be a key contributor, although the matchup against Denver is really not ideal, but I do expect that he will provide more points than Darren McFadden did for him last week. Emmanuel Sanders is banged up, which could mean beneficiary things for Dennis's roster. Demaryius Thomas, in particular, is a guy who could be in line for even more action if that's even possible. Multiple touchdowns are possible for Demaryius Thomas this week against Miami. We do have Ryan Mallett at quarterback, as we've mentioned. He does have the ability to throw the deep ball, so that does benefit Hopkins for Bill's roster, but it also opens up things for Arian Foster. He's projected over 20 points this week. I definitely think he's in line for a big game, and this switch to Ryan Mallett at quarterback could be a catalyst for even more production from both Hopkins and Foster as the season goes along. Really solid performance on Sunday from Reggie Wayne. Traditionally, he's done well against Jacksonville, but he's really going to need to find the end zone. That's ultimately been his downfall this year, is that he hasn't been able to get those touchdowns as needed. So Reggie Wayne's definitely going to be someone we're watching for. Another guy we're watching for out of the wide receiver position, Steve Smith. His numbers have been in sharp decline the last 4 weeks. He's been in single-digit point totals, so that needs to change sooner rather than later in order for Bill to have a shot at pulling off Dennis. Now, call me crazy here, but I think that Dennis's wide receivers will give him enough support to get the victory on Sunday and Monday against Bill's team. It's a bit of an upset, it's a bit of a gamble, and I know Dennis won't be happy that I'm taking him, but I'm strictly going based off his wide receiver production. I also think Drew Brees is going to have a big game on Monday Night Football. So there you have it. That's what we have this week for you in Week 12. Hope you enjoyed the exclusive behind-the-scenes footage of how we do these selections every single week. Big thanks to Sean for putting these things together as well. Enjoy the action here. Let's go.